Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this Leanpub podcast, I'll be interviewing Andy Gill. Andy is a web application penetration tester and a researcher and blogger, and I gather also a martial artist, and I'm going to be asking him a little bit about that. You can read Andy's blog at blog.zedsec.uk and check out his website at zephyr.fish. That's ZEPHR.fish. And you can follow him on Twitter at zephyrfish with the same kind of spelling. Andy is the author of the Leanpub book, Breaking into Information Security, Learning the Ropes 101. His book is meant to teach people about the information technology security industry and ethical hacking, and how to start a career in web application penetration testing and seeking bug bounties, something that's an increasingly important part of our general day-to-day activity with software eating the world. And it's something that we could actually all benefit from understanding better, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested in getting to know a little bit about this area. In this interview, we're going to talk about Andy's professional interests, his book, and at the end we'll talk a little bit about his experience using Leanpub. So thank you, Andy, for being on the Leanpub podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you first became interested in, computers and software, and eventually the security aspect of things. And from what I gather, your interest began pretty early on.
Yeah, I've been doing hacking, as it were. Not the term hacking's chucked about a lot, but I've been taking things apart, seeing how they work, and breaking things since I was about 5 or 6. But I actually got into computers when I was in my kind of early teens, so about 12, 13. Started playing about with software, doing bits and pieces, which transitioned into school. Got in a bit of trouble doing a bit of breaking things, which obviously don't advocate for now, but you make mistakes when you're younger. So got in a bit of trouble. My guidance teacher suggested that I go and study at uni, which I eventually got to, having taken the longer route round. The traditional route in the UK is that you get your school, like secondary school qualifications or high school in America. You then go to university and get your degree, and boom, that's it. However, I didn't take that route. I failed basically high school, failed high school. Got two certifications. Ended up going to college, which is like a kind of transition between high school and university. Did a year there. Went to university. Finally got a degree. Landed on my feet and met some really interesting people along the way. And as a result of that, got into the industry. So it's bumpy road, but got there eventually.
Yeah, that makes me very curious about a few things. One of the things I'd like to ask is, and it's one of the themes of this podcast, is what you studied at university, because I find about half of people who end up in, software generally did, and half did not study computer science at university.
I studied a very specialist degree. My degree was titled Digital Security, Forensics and Ethical Hacking. So it was very focused surrounding the kind of security aspect of information technology. But the primary focus of it was on forensics with a little bit of ethical hacking, and it was the ethical hacking that piqued my interest, and that's what drove me to my career that I'm in right now.
And can you explain perhaps to someone who might not understand what the difference is between sort of unethical hacking and ethical hacking?
The main difference between ethical hacking and illegal hacking, as it were, is permission. In my profession, we as professionals are given a contract from our client saying, we give you permission to hack website X or IP address X. A bad guy is not going to have permission to do that. So they're going to just go and attack whatever they feel like with no written confirmation from whoever they're attacking, no permission to go off rails and take things down, for example. Whereas in the professional aspect of things, you're given, everything's written by the book, you're given a scope. You're usually in a pen test, you'll be given, like, we want you to attack this application, it's located here, you can only go to this domain. If you go outside of the scope, then we're not covered from a liability perspective. So that's the main difference between ethical hacking and bad hacking, I suppose you would call it.
And how do you get that permission?
How do you get the permission? Well, there's a large variety of different areas of pen testing, so that can fall under bug bounty hunting, which is you go through a platform, they have a scope that's outlined, and you as long as you stick in that scope, you're usually safe. Or if it's the professional aspect of things, you have a client that comes to you pretty much with a contract like you would in any other job. So if you were a plumber, plumbing in a boiler, you'd have a contract to deliver the job in X amount of days. It's the same sort of terms and conditions in pen testing. You have 5 days. Like, for example, this week in my profession, I'm looking at an application and I've got 11 days to see how much I can find in this application. And at the end of those 11 days, I'll give the client a report saying I found X, Y, and Z. This is how you patch it. This is how it impacts your business. And this is why you might want to patch it. So, for example, I found something today that allows a rogue attacker to email content to the website, and the website will run that code, and as a result, for me, enable me to execute arbitrary commands on the server, which is a bad thing because being able to email things and the website running them is not great.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad. And you do the you have a day job, as I understand it, as a pen tester, penetration tester for an organization, and then you have on the side is where you do the bug bounty kind of.
Yeah, bug bounty hunting is like a sort of hobby more than it's a job. So like my day job, I break shit, and then I don't know if I want to swear in this podcast, but I break stuff. I break shit on a daily basis, either through my job or as my hobby, both digitally and physically with martial arts. So the bug bounty aspect of things is mainly a hobby. For some people, it's a full-time job, but for me, I just find it as a kind of a playground, as it were. There's usually a lot wider scope in a bug bounty versus pen testing, so there's a lot more fun things to play on, and often you see systems that you wouldn't usually see.
Yeah, I have a sort of very direct question about the martial arts in just a second. But before we get there, you mentioned playgrounds, and you mentioned earlier some youthful indiscretions. Do you want to perhaps talk a little bit about that without necessarily getting specific? Perhaps, because it's very easy to get curious and to start poking around, and, breaking stuff can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of youthful experience in high school, I found several flaws in the school computing system that allowed me to bypass the restrictions that were in place. So in school, they were very heavy on blocking things like Facebook and YouTube and game sites, and I found ways to bypass that to enable me to listen to music and play games in IT, which usually you shouldn't be doing. You should be learning, but kids are curious. Kids want to play. So that was a kind of slightly less damaging than other things that I did at school. Another example that I can probably speak about is that round about when I was 14 or 15, I found a way to change the school administrator's password and unlock everything.
Oh my!
So that got me in quite a bit of trouble, but it was fun at the time. So.
Yeah, that reminds me. I spent a couple years in high school at a boarding school, and there were various traditions that were passed down from a sort of senior to a junior, and one of those traditions was an actual master key for all the physical doors in the institution. And we made some use of that for pranks and such. And I can imagine. I can see how tempting getting an administrator's password might, or getting, access to what they've got can be. Specifically on the subject of martial arts, I've done a little bit of training myself, and so I'd kind of like to ask you a little bit about that in a second. But first, we actually had another tester who we've interviewed, or who I interviewed for this podcast, named David Greenlees, who has a book on Leanpub called Software Testing as a Martial Art.
All right, okay.
And he, as I think you point out maybe it's in your book or it's in your blog, you point out how, in some places testing is much more compartmentalized, and people become a specialist at a very specific type of testing as opposed to just general tester. And I don't know if David is specifically in the security area, but he draws a very explicit connection between, killing bugs and fighting people. Do you feel that there's a connection between, your martial arts, the sort of spirit that drives you to martial arts training, and
there is a direct correlation between martial arts and hacking, as it were. I run the local DEF CON chapter for Glasgow, and a couple of months ago I did a talk called Jab Cross Hack, which is in the name. It talks about the direct correlation between hunting for software bugs and fighting an opponent. The defense mechanisms that an opponent puts up is the same sort of defense mechanisms that a computer puts up. And when you're fighting or sparring, you're always looking for that gap to get your punch in or to get your kick in or to score. And it's the same mindset that you apply to hacking. You're always looking for that hole to find something, to pop something, to get through the firewall, or to upload something you're not meant to upload. It's exploiting vulnerabilities just as you would do in a ring on a computer.
And you train in karate, is that correct?
Yeah, I train in the base of the club is in karate, but the training we do is quite diverse. So we're not specialists. Well, the base is karate, but we do like groundwork like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We do throws and judo, wrestling, a bit of everything. But my core strength is stand-up sparring. So I'm a tall guy. My specialist is kicks.
And you've competed in contact tournaments?
Yeah, I've fought at full contact level, which it's sore but good fun.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I mean, I did a bit of competing in Taekwondo back in the day. It was WTF Taekwondo, so it was definitely contact. You could kick. There were curious rules, though, and this is what I'm interested in asking you about. So, for example, in the Taekwondo that I did, which was the kind that was at the Olympics,
that's the one where they jump about and just keep the leg in the air and keep flicking it about. Or...
Well, basically, yeah, you're not allowed to punch in the head, but you can kick someone in the head as hard as you want, and nothing below the waist were more or less the rules.
Yeah, I mean, there are different variations in the rules of karate. There's what's called wuko karate, which is scoring karate, which is more like, I suppose, tag, where it's quickest to score. You're aiming to get a punch or a kick clean in and score. Or there's the full contact side of things where it's similar to what you're talking about. You can't punch the head, but you can punch the body, you can punch the legs, you can knee to the body, you can kick the legs, you can kick the ribs, you can kick to the head. You can't punch the head, but more or less everything else goes. You just can't kick to the groin and knee to the groin. And you can throw, but you can't grab the suits, you can't grab the gi. You need to use like technique as opposed to, and you also can't clinch like you would in Muay Thai, so you can't like grab somebody by the head and pull them in. It's all kind of open hand.
And are you wearing any padding when you're competing in that way?
In full contact, in what's called Kyokushin karate, it's bare knuckle fighting, but you have in some competitions there's no pads at all apart from gum shield and groin guard. In others you'll have shin and instep, but you won't. It's still bare knuckle, and you still have a gum shield for safety reasons because you don't want to lose your teeth.
Yeah, I only know a little bit about Kyokushin. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but that's some pretty tough stuff.
Yeah, it's hard going. I mean, if anyone's interested, if you look it up on YouTube, you can see some of the fights that are on YouTube they're brutal, but they're enjoyable to watch.
And bringing it back to testing and security and things like that, I'm recalling my first minute of my first fight. Excuse me. Things changed dramatically the moment the fight started. My heart, suddenly I realized, like, this guy's trying to kick me in the head as hard as he can, and I'm trying to do the same thing to him. And, that first minute lasted, forever. And I'm curious if in any of the work that you've done, you've ever been in, like, a time-constrained situation where you realize, like, I've got to get this done really quickly before the system stops me. Is there anything analogous to that?
There is, in a sense. I mean, but when you're doing testing, you get slow days and you get quick days and you get tests that are long and tests that are short. But the tests that the kind of where the adrenaline kicks in is if you're on like a 3-day test, you've got 3 days to look at an application. You get to the end of day 2, shit, you've not found anything. Now, from a client's perspective, that might be like, oh yeah, we're secure, that's cool. But from a tester's perspective, you've got nothing to report, or you've got very minimal findings to report. So the adrenaline starts to kick in. You start to look at things and going, what am I missing? I've spent 2 days, I've spent 16 hours, 20 hours on this. Why have I not found anything? So it's the same sort of mentality. It's not quite as kind of high stress adrenaline as it would be in a ring or on the mats, because obviously in the mats you've got somebody attacking you, so you're not in the same sort of line of fire. But it is the same sort of high stress, high mentality. The adrenaline isn't the same though, because you don't have somebody trying to kick you in the head.
Yeah. One of the, I think you mentioned, the sort of pressure to report, and one of the interesting things that you talk about on your blog and in your book is the importance of reporting properly, and it's really interesting because, from the sort of someone who's not familiar with this area, maybe someone who just sees, movies with hackers and stuff like that, the reporting side of it is something that I think even people who do engage in the work are sometimes not very familiar with the importance of. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I found your emphasis on that to be unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know I'm one of the rare pen testers that thoroughly enjoy reporting. A lot of people see a report as, shit, I've got to do a report, I've got the last day of the test, I've got to give this to the client. But from my perspective, well, actually, from anyone's perspective, it should be that the report is the main product. The hacking is a byproduct of the report. The client pays you money for your findings, but if you've hacked a cool website, so you've found a way to get past the firewall, you're on their systems, that's cool. But how are you going to tell the client that? You can't just go, oh yeah, I'm in your system, fantastic. Client goes, whoop-de-doo, like, what does that mean to me? How do I fix it? How do I reproduce it? And the emphasis on reporting in both my blog and my book is because it's more focused around what I've seen working in industry and also what I've seen on bug bounty platforms. People don't tend to pay too much attention to reporting as they do to finding really cool, super cool hacks. And being able to apply what you've found in a more reproducible manner will make it easier for your client to understand what you've found. And if it's in a bug bounty situation, and I've had it happen to me, the client or the platform might see that as a benefit and end up paying you out more than they would normally for the report. So if you've demonstrated clearly how you got to what you found, clearly and concisely, then it makes it easier for them to reproduce. But also from a professional aspect, it usually means that like companies will have more than one consultancy test them. It's for best practice, so they'll have their app, and it won't be at the same time. So you won't be testing at the same time as a consultancy, but maybe it'll get tested in January, and then they're going live in, I don't know, June. So they need it tested 2 or 3 times. So they'll go to different consultancies, and if your report, out of all the consultancies, if your report comes out being as clear as possible, they're more likely to come back to you for business, but they're more likely to understand, and they're hopefully more likely to fix the issues. Because you'll get some people who will run scanners, output the scanner output, and just chuck that in a report. Now, the scanner output, it's clear on some issues, but on others it makes no sense. Sometimes there's false positives. Being able to report that clear and concisely will improve the general output of your work.
And what's a scanner?
A scanner is a tool that is used for automatically finding flaws in software. So it will chuck lots of different probes, so like lots of different strings of text and different packets at a target to try and identify what different response comes back. So it might chuck like true into a false field and see if there's anything that comes back, or false into a true field. So taking it as an example, say you're looking at like a commercial website where you're buying something. You're trying to buy a TV. TV costs $1,000 or £1,000. If you chuck a scanner at that, the scanner might change the value from £1,000 to £0, And if it comes back as true, then that would come up as that would be a fault. And the scanner would be like, well, I'm expecting this to come back as 1,000, but it's come back as 0. This might be a fault. Now, doing that manually would be fine, but imagine you're testing 1,000 applications that have all got those different fields. For obvious reasons, you want to automate that because you're not going to do that all manually in 2 or 3 days. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. One of the other interesting things that I found relatively unique about your book and about your blog and the introduction that you give to this world is the importance of networking and talking to people to be a good penetration tester and, I suppose, bug bounty hunter. And I mean, it's an easy joke these days, but given the current occupant of the White House seems to think that people who use computers are 400-pound men in their mom's basement. Not that there's anything remotely wrong with that, but you do talk about the importance of socializing and networking, and actually how, although one can have one's own personality and one's own life, that talking to other people is actually a really important part of the work.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for several reasons. I mean, human interaction is always, regardless of your profession, always going to help you, because being social, it does a couple of things. For some people just don't enjoy being social, but for a lot of people, it kind of raises your endorphins, it makes you happier, it makes you more kind of come out of yourself. But applying it to the kind of area of security and IT, the traditional aspect is that we tend to be quite introverts. We tend to be quite antisocial individuals, and we're that awkward person in the corner of the bar drinking a whiskey or drinking a beer. But making it more social and making it more open, if you talk to more people, you'll make more contacts. And if you make more contacts, it's about who you know in the industry, not necessarily what you know. So the book is based around getting yourself into the industry. And the only way you're going to get into the industry, it might be cool that you've got lots of skills, but if you don't actually speak to people, how are you going to know if there's jobs, or how are you going to know who's good to work for from word of mouth and other aspects of things? But from a general community perspective, growing your social skills just generally helps you in life, because you can go to conferences and happily speak to complete strangers. I mean, not everyone's going to be a social butterfly, but it does help. I found it very helpful for myself. That I got into the industry from being social, so it does help.
Yeah, that's a really good response, and I know from having interviewed Peter Yaworski, who I believe you.
Oh yeah, Pete's a lovely guy. He's good.
Yeah, he in our interview he spoke quite a bit about the importance of community and gave the impression of a lot of support out there. But I guess there was something that you sort of touched on a little while ago about, or just a short time ago, I guess, about how the different consultancies can actually be set to the same task as a matter of best practice. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the competitive aspect of things. I mean, do you, as a penetration tester, do you have, because this is something that happens in martial arts as well, where you have to have a community in order to teach and maintain tradition and things like that, but you do kind of keep a few tricks up your sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, the aspect, my personal opinion on it is that I think all knowledge should be open. I think that everyone should share their knowledge with the community, because the only way to grow a community is to share. Now, others don't necessarily have that opinion. I know people that I work with don't have that opinion. Well, some people don't have that opinion, not everyone, but some people believe that if I share my secrets with everyone, then everyone's going to be better than me. But that's not true. Your skill comes from not only what you know, but how you communicate it. So that's where it comes back to reporting. The social aspect, the communication aspect, the writing aspect, if you can put that into report, if you can put that into communications back to a vendor, a client, or just anyone, it highlights you as being a skillful individual. Because you might have the most technical skills on the planet, but if you can't communicate that efficiently to the client's never going to know. Or the client might not even care. They might not even care if you found a really cool vulnerability. If they can't reproduce it, if they can't fix it, what use is it to them? What are they paying you $2,000 a day for? Or what are they paying you $5,000 for bug X? if they can't fix it. Because what's to stop you reporting it on Monday, them going, right, cool, we've resolved this, but your report isn't good enough, so they haven't fixed it. Somebody goes on Tuesday and reports it again, and they've found a different way of doing it. If you've not effectively communicated how you found it, then the client's out of pocket. They're maybe not so happy. So, and if it's in a professional environment, if they're not so happy, they're less likely to go with you again. So you're more likely to lose business.
It's security is a really big topic these days. I don't suppose that's necessarily anything new, but just recently there was the WannaCry scandal, I suppose you could call it, ransomware. And as I understand it, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what happened was, I gather it was the NSA in the United States found some exploits, didn't reveal them to the companies that were affected, and then the NSA's information was managed to get into the hands of these bad actors. And so there's this debate about whether or not government agencies should tell companies when they discover vulnerabilities. And what's your position on that?
It's a bit of a controversial topic. I mean, the idea that governments are harvesting what are called 0 days, so software that is previously unpatched. On one hand, it's they should tell the vendor, yeah, go for it. But on the other hand, this is kind of devil's advocate. They're hoarding them for a reason. Now, the main reason they hoard these 0 days is to get the up on other nation states. So if you take, I don't want to start World War III, but if you take Russia and the US, for example, the US is likely to have 0 days in Russia's systems, and Russia is likely to have 0 days in the US systems. So them finding intelligence without Trump telling them about it, but that's another topic. They might find more information about the next intelligence step. So if the US have got secret agents in Russia, Russia might have 0 days to find out who those people are and start to give them less information. So it's international nation state spy sort of stuff. I suppose it's a bit like James Bond if you think about it. But dialing back to the original question, do I think it's right or wrong? I'm kind of in the middle. From a kind of ethical point of view, I think that nation states should tell the vendors, but from a kind of governments one-upping each other and preventing wars, I think it's not ethical, but to an extent sort of right. But that's just me. Having never worked for government, I don't know what the environment is like, so I can't comment on that really. But yes. I'm sort of in the middle. There are for arguments and there are against arguments. And a lot of people will say it's a bad thing. A lot of people say it's a good thing. But it's just people one-upping each other. There's always going to be software bugs. No code is 100% secure, and never claim something is hack-proof, because it definitely is hackable.
Yeah, and as you're pointing out so well, it's there are real fights out there, and if you are on one side or another, you might want your side to have the tools that it needs. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, if you could explain a little bit more about what a 0 day is, and I guess I have. Well, actually, yeah, if you could just explain a little bit about what that is. I mean, I'm sure many of our listeners know, but some probably don't.
So a 0 day or O day, depending on how you say it, is essentially a vulnerability in software that has been 0 days since patched. So if I find a flaw in Windows 10 that allows me to run malicious software without the user knowing, so if I send you a link and you click on that link and that automatically runs a piece of malicious software, that would potentially be a 0 day, because Microsoft haven't patched it. You have like no can defense against it. There are lots of complex terms thrown about surrounding 0 days, but the basics of it is it's a flaw in software that's not been patched or is not known. So you could find the flaw today, hoard it for 10 years, and Microsoft or Linux or Red Hat or a software vendor would never know about it because you found it and you haven't reported it to them. That's not to say that somebody else hasn't found it either, but it's basically a flaw that hasn't been patched, or it hasn't been patched. Is the easy way to say it.
And I guess this is kind of getting a little bit in the weeds, but do people lay traps? I'm curious if that's a part of the security world. I mean, do you sometimes dangle out, something that is intended to look like a 0 day to someone in order to catch them?
Well, sort of. You get things in kind of threat intelligence. It's not my area of expertise, but I do have colleagues that work in it where they will run something called a honeypot. So they will run a purposefully vulnerable piece of software or purposely unsecured server, on the internet that attackers will see as an opportunists will see attack and possibly gain access to it. And from the defender's perspective, they'll be letting them run riot, do whatever they want, but the defender will be looking at how did they get in, what are they using to get in, is it a known technique that we've seen before? And that's how kind of threat intelligence is built up. It's more for analytics perspective and kind of future proofing and patching it 0 days than it is for here's a 0 day go, or here's something that might be a 0 day. I mean, I have no doubt that happens, but I've yet to encounter it.
And I think you mentioned that anything can be hacked, or at least one should assume that anything can be hacked.
Yeah.
What's your opinion about the Internet of Things?
Oh, it's great fun. Internet of Things is like taking modern technology and dialing back to the 90s and going, we've built a really cool thing and we've called it smart. Oh yeah, that security thing. Shit, we should probably put that in. They'll develop a really cool thing. Well, we've developed a smart fridge. We can order your groceries, no bother. Then somebody comes along and goes, yeah, but how are you securing my card details, or how are you securing my milk? How do you know that milk's going to my address and not to Bob Smith's address in California? So the security aspect of the Internet of Things it's sort of an afterthought at the moment. However, the company I work for, Pentest, we're working with lots of different clients to try and change that mindset. So you're doing secure by design. So security should be in step 1 as opposed to step 10, or step 1 instead of step 4, where you're designing your internet-enabled light bulb or internet-enabled something, internet-enabled dildo I saw in the news recently. Who wants to do that? Weird people, don't know. But you should be securing privacy data before anything really, or secure. Basically, if you build something that's connected to the internet, think about what you're most worried about losing and secure that first before you put any extra features in. So if you've got an internet-enabled pen, for example, it's the first thing I thought of, the internet-enabled pen that sends your writing to a cloud provider. You want to secure the path as to where that's going. You want to make sure what you're sending is secure. So you don't want to be sending your handwriting in clear text if you're writing out, I don't know, if you're writing out your Christmas list to Santa. You don't want other people finding out what your Christmas list is. So you want to send that securely, package it up, encrypt it possibly from the first step before you make it a blue pen or you make it multicolored.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's so complex. I mean, for example, the risks are so complex. Like, for example, you can imagine if someone has, say, a smart fridge, you can imagine someone hacking it to make it, become warm at night, and then cool it back up so the person doesn't notice that their milk's gone. I've
just thought of a really interesting. So one of my friends, there's a conference that ran this year in Scotland called B-Sides Edinburgh, and a friend of mine thought of a great talk topic, but time ran out for us to present it, called the Internet of Death. Now, the idea was to take 3 or 4 household items and think of different ways in which you could hack them to essentially kill someone. Now, from a kind of security perspective, if you hack into like a fridge, you could overheat the cooling element and possibly blow up a house. Not the best way to die, but hey, it happens. Or you could take the one that we were looking at was like heating elements in kettles. If you could turn a kettle on and off several hundred times a second, the heating element's going to heat up and cause an explosion possibly. So that's another way. Another thing we looked at was actually smart dildos. You could somebody could come to an end from that. And the other one we looked at was heating elements in boilers. So companies like Nest and like other thermostats they're smart. You can turn it on and off from your phone, so you can make the house warm before you come home, or you can cool it down if it's in summer. So the idea was to make it like super hot or super cold, and then keep it super cold. That's hypothermia.
That's really interesting. I'm not going to forget the Internet of Death as an idea. That would make a great blog post or even a book of its own. I mean, I guess it partly just speaks to, the boundless creativity and imagination that one can put to nefarious ends, and how the facility that like speed of light communication networks give us now, and the complexity of the tools that are at our fingertips, I mean, place few constraints, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that springs to mind on the kind of topic of internet death is that part of my degree was in digital forensics, and the one thing they were talking about, which was going to be up and coming, was wearables. But when I did my degree, Internet of Things wasn't really a thing. I mean, obviously wearables are Internet of Things devices, but the law enforcement will now be looking to people's fridges to see, or people's doorbells to see when they were out of the house or what they ordered. So if there's like a homicide investigation, if somebody's been robbed and killed in their house, did they die from an allergic reaction? Did their fridge order like nuts? Are they allergic to nuts? Or did their were the lights on at the time? Or so it adds a whole new layer to kind of investigations of things. It adds a whole new layer to kind of digital forensics. You're no longer just looking at the footprint on the internet. You're also looking at the physical footprint of the house. It's sort of a bit of a tangent, but it's an interesting topic.
No, that's really fascinating. It reminded me of, I believe it's a journalist in the United States who was attacked with a strobe lighting effect attachment to a tweet. And, I can just imagine if someone has some internet-enabled lights, the mischief that someone can get up to. I mean, when you talk about, starting and stopping a kettle 1,000 times a second or something like that. It really, sounds like people really ought to consider the risks, especially if you're saying I gather from your statement about, like it was back in the 90s, that people are basically appear to be behaving rather recklessly.
Yeah, I mean, the Internet of Things, I 2 years ago I'd probably count it as a fad, but it's now becoming a kind of reality that everything is going to be internet enabled at some point or another. But it seems to be that everyone is trying to rush out their internet enabled device without any care or regard to security. I mean, the biggest kind of publicly known flaw with Internet of Things was the Mirai malware. I don't know if you heard about it. It was, I think it was nation state. I can't remember. But basically, there was a malicious attacker who went after all internet-enabled devices that had default usernames and passwords on the internet. So the default username and password was like maybe admin or admin12345, and they infected these devices with a piece of malicious software that would add that device to a botnet. So a kind of a group of machines that could be used to attack other machines. And they collected like kettles, security cameras, anything that's really internet enabled and use them to cause denials of service against applications, websites. There's an account on Twitter that tracks these. I mean, it's still going on, but essentially that was the biggest publicized Internet of Things form of attack, using internet-enabled devices to cause distributed denial of service attacks against, well, websites, things on the internet, really.
And what was it called again? Mirai?
Mirai, Mirai, I think it is.
Okay, I'll do some checking after this interview to find out for sure and put some links in the notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember hearing about that. I guess they can say, safety starts at home, and everybody listening, please use good passwords.
Password security. Well, actually, even better, use passphrases. So use like lyrics to a song, or use the first letter. If I don't know, the hills are alive with the sound of music, use the first letter of each word as a password, because it's random. It's not a dictionary word, but it's you remember it. Or take. I always advise my grandparents and parents to have passphrases. So think of lyrics, or think of phrases that you've heard before and you can remember. Use that as a password instead of password one. Never use password one.
Why do you say that? Do you mean one password?
No, well, that, and also never use
I see what you mean. Literally, PASSWORD 1.
Yeah, I mean, don't use one password for everything as well. I mean, that would be general advice. Have unique. I mean, the advice that I give to people is use a password manager. So use something like LastPass, or KeepSafe, or KeePass.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the reason I was confused is I have a password manager called 1Password.
1Password, yeah, on Mac OS, or yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, excellent advice. On the general topic as well, obviously one of the things that seems to be coming is self-driving cars. And there have been articles in the media, obviously, about that. And there were a couple of guys who I think were featured on Wired who managed to hack into an SUV, I think it was, while the journalist was driving it down the highway, which struck me as very reckless and dangerous. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think from a technology perspective, self-driving cars is phenomenal. It's such a breakthrough. It's like amazing. But from a security perspective, it's not quite there yet. Not to say that it will never be there, but I'd say it needs 10 years more development of security. But saying that, just car security in general, there's a massive community surrounding car hacking. There's various books about car hacking that are out, from old school technology like plugging into the port in the physical car through to new stuff. But saying new stuff, kind of moderately new, like Bluetooth hacking. It's, if you think about it, a self-driving car, somebody isn't actually going to think, how is this secure? They're going to be more concerned about, is it going to drive me into a wall, or how is the artificial intelligence going to work? Is it going to learn that, yes, it was a left turn yesterday, but now the builders have dug that up and it's now a trench? It still needs development. I think it's a cool topic, but I think the security surrounding it still needs work.
And what can be done
to secure it? It's not my area of expertise, so I'm not really sure. I think from a basic standpoint, I think securing the main, first of all, securing the physical device, so securing the car, making sure there's no exposed ports. Don't put 3G in them. Don't put Wi-Fi hotspots in them. Taking things like the Nissan Leaf that was hacked last year, it had a Wi-Fi hotspot built into it. Why do you want a Wi-Fi hotspot in your car, you might ask? Nobody knows. It was just there. You've got, cars are now computers. So you want to secure a car like you would secure your computer. Put a password on it. Have authentication on top of your key. Have two-factor authentication. So if actually self-driving cars, two-factor authentication, if it isn't a thing, should definitely be a thing. So you have your key to your car, but you also, when you get into the car, you need to put in a PIN code, or the car sends you a signal to your phone and to check that it's you. That would be different authentication methods to drive the car. But then I suppose you've got the complexities of different drivers for the cars and things. But I would hope to see multiple factor authentication for self-driving cars.
That's really interesting. I've never quite thought of that before. I mean, personally, I'm a big advocate of it. I think the most dangerous security threat in a car is the person driving it.
But I'm also a petrol head as well, so having self-driving cars, you don't have the same experience of cutting about, having a good laugh and feeling pedal to metal. But that's my personal kind of loving of cars. But as you say, the biggest danger on the road is the person behind the wheel, as it is with a computer. The biggest single point of failure is the human link in the chain. So it's the same. We're just bad. We're just bad, not individuals, you and I, but the human race, full of idiots.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, on just the general topic, I mean, in a profession like yours, it's really interesting. I mean, there you are trying to find vulnerabilities because there are other people who have bad intentions who are also trying to find those vulnerabilities all the time. So there's this element of urgency, I suppose, but also an awareness of the bad forces that really are out there.
Dial into the human aspect of things. The one thing that bug bounties lack in comparison to penetration testing is the human aspect of things. The one area that is almost always out of scope is what's called social engineering or phishing. So that is the act of attacking the human side of things. So calling up a bank or calling up a company and saying, "Hi, this is Bill from IT. We've recently changed the password policy, and we need you to change your password. What is your current password?" And Gill in accounting might be like, "My password's Elephant3. I'd like to change it to this." So Bill, who is the malicious person, goes into Gill's accountancy user account, logs in, and you've got an attacker in your system straight away.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lest any of our listeners think they might not be vulnerable to phishing, it only takes one moment. Just one moment, one slip, and that's it. And
Well, there's actually a really good example of this. Sorry to cut over you, but in regards to phishing, one of my friends, who Pete also knows, a guy called Kev. Not going to say his last name. Don't want to call him out on it. But there was a Gmail phishing scam about 2 weeks ago or a month ago, which basically said, click on this link, you've got Google Docs to open, and it would redirect you to your kind of single authentication. So it would assume that you're logged into your Gmail account and would use the technology behind that to log you into a malicious Google Docs, but it would send your details off to the attacker. Now that's probably one of the most complex phishing scams that I've ever seen, but it just took simply clicking on that link, not looking at who's it from, but saying, "Oh, it looks a bit like Google Docs. I've not logged into Google Docs for a while," or whatever. Clicking on it and your account's compromised essentially. So it's a spur of the moment thing, and the one thing that phishing plays on is people either not paying attention or it being so convincing that it can't possibly not be legitimate.
Well, I think too that partly what it plays on too is that so much of what you might be doing is routine. Like I see a blue link and I click on it. And if you're just clicking around, and you're going through trying to get through your emails as quickly as you can, an email from someone familiar with a link in it, you just click on it and you can be just like that moment. You're like, oh, damn it.
Yeah.
But it's where over time, I think people are pretty easy to hack if you get enough chances.
Yeah. I mean, nobody, anyone in the security industry, you're never 100% hack proof. There's always going to be a moment where you don't think, you click on something or somebody calls up and you've either there's always going to be smarter individuals than you, and you never think that you're never going to be hacked, because you will. It'll happen. You'll accidentally click on something, or somebody will stalk you, or somebody will find information about you. Nowadays there's no true way to 100% privacy. Hate to say it, but privacy is dead, and just being more vigilant about what you click on and being more vigilant about what you do it will decrease your chance of being compromised, but it will happen. It will happen.
One last question I guess I have on this topic before we talk a little bit more specifically about your book. When it comes to privacy, one of the things one hears about is people starting to use apps like I think it's called Signal, or even the BlackBerry app for messaging, BBM, I think. Are you a believer in those things? Do you think that it's genuinely true that they're encrypted end to end?
Yeah, I use Signal, I use Telegram, I use WhatsApp, I use end-to-end encrypted conversations. But nowadays, I mean, certainly the UK, the UK government is going to change in like a month's time. There is an election, but the current government, or the previous government, the Conservatives who were in place, were wanting to ban encryption because they think, terrorism, encryption, that sort of thing. But using end-to-end encryption is the best thing you can do, regardless if you're talking about ordering your groceries or if you're talking about planning a military operation. Nobody should have the right to see what you're talking about. Nobody should have the right to decrypt your traffic and view it, because it's the only person that should care about what you're talking about is you and the receiver. Regardless if you're a terrorist, regardless if you're speaking to your granny, your conversation should be private. That's my opinion. I mean, terrorism's horrible. It shouldn't happen. But the fact that somebody has, or the fact that an organisation or individual thinks that they have the right to spy on your conversations, I think that's wrong. And I think using end-to-end encryption like Signal, using Tor, using Telegram, using WhatsApp, just using an end-to-end encrypted application, best thing you can do.
Well, and I think I agree with you, and I think the argument from the other side is, do you really think that it's going to not someday be helpful to bad actors to have backdoors into everything?
Well, there is that as well. I mean, the not just bad actors, but government actors. The biggest case probably that a lot of listeners and the public will know about is that the NSA were asking Apple to decrypt an iPhone last year, I think it was. And Apple were like, no, we respect our users' privacy. We're not decrypt this. But also we can't decrypt it because it's unique to the device. And there have been cases in the past where the NSA have approached Samsung, they've approached Apple going, can you build a backdoor in for us, say that this happens? And it's down to those companies like Apple and Samsung to go, no, we're keeping our devices secure. We respect our users more than we respect the national security, as the buzzword is chucked about. But the malicious actors, they may find 0 days in those software, and they may not tell people about those 0 days. And that's a risk. It's going to happen, but there's no way to prevent it, because how are you to know if somebody's got a 0 day in this software, if they're spying your software, if not even the vendor knows?
I now have yet one more question before we get directly to your book.
Yeah, no problem. I love talking. So this kind of interview will be full of tangents on different topics, but I'm happy to talk about them because I enjoy them, and it's.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great, and I'm very happy to hear that. I lived in the UK for about 9 years, and just last week I was interviewing someone from London, and I was asking about the mood around, post Brexit. And I mean, you're in Scotland, coming to us from Glasgow, so things are even more complicated in their own way there. But I guess generally speaking, in the tech sector, is there any anxiety related to what's going on? I mean, do people feel secure? Do they feel that their foreign-born colleagues are going to be forced to leave? I mean, is that a real on-the-ground worry that people have?
It is a real issue. I mean, I have colleagues who are from India. I have colleagues who are from Brazil, who are from different parts of Europe and Asia, and they work in the UK. They work in the office with me in Glasgow, and they have had genuine worries that, is Brexit going to affect their employment? And the thing is with the government and people that have voted for Brexit, I personally voted to remain in Europe because I believe that the free market should be a thing, but my political views are irrelevant to this conversation. The thing that the government overlook is that they go, oh yeah, we're going to cut down immigration, we're going to cut down this, but they don't think about people who are actually in jobs, who are actually doing things, who are actually helping the environment, helping the economy. They just see it as numbers on a page. They just want to cut down, we want to stop X amount of people coming from this country into ours, but it's all fueled. Personally, I think it's all fueled from racism. I think that's what it is. But they're too cowardly to say that. Obviously, if you say that in a political stance, it's like political suicide. But it's true. It is based upon racism. It's people saying, "Oh, you're different from me. I don't like you. So get out of my country." And it's I don't agree with that at all. I think it's a horrible way of doing things, and it's what a lot of people felt when they decided to vote to leave the EU. They were lied to. But hey, political agendas. Trump's in power. That happened.
Yeah, I actually feel bad that I don't know the answer to this next question already. But did a majority of people who voted in Scotland vote to remain?
Yes, something like 50, I think it was like 55% voted to remain in the EU because it was one of the terms and conditions within the Scottish independence referendum, which happened in 2014, that Scotland would still have a place in Europe. However, there's now a lot of controversy with the UK government and the Scottish government going, well, you guys said we could stay in Europe, yet you've initiated Brexit. We want our second independence referendum. Personally, when I voted first time round for independence in Scotland, I voted yes to leave the UK. That was a great idea. But now that Brexit has happened, I think right now probably isn't the best time to go independent. I think if the UK was still part of the EU, then it'd be great. But it's now is not the time.
Yeah, that's really it's really interesting. I mean, these moments of choice, are actually pretty rare where it's so direct, at a nation like at a national level. I mean, you can have local referenda and stuff like that, but it can't be stressed enough how significant the Brexit vote was.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite controversial as well because the thing that annoyed me and a lot of other people most about the Brexit vote is that 90% of the politicians that were campaigning for leaving, so campaigning for Brexit, were straight up lying through their front teeth. So the biggest piece of controversy was a bus that was paraded around the UK saying we're going to give 350 odd million back to the NHS. And the day after Brexit what came through as people wanting to leave the UK, that same individual, Nigel Farage, who ran the UKIP, a UK party for UK independence, basically went, I didn't say that at all. Yet there was pictures of this bus all over the place. Everyone felt they'd been lied to. That was just one aspect of it, but there were lots of other aspects. There were things that were promised that there was no way they were going to be delivered. There were constituencies that were lied to, saying, "Oh yeah, leaving the EU is a great idea," and then they're going, "But we're getting X amount of million funding. Can we keep that?" And they're like, "No, you've left. You can't have that. You can't have your cake and eat it." So,
yeah, and Farage quit.
He did
summarily.
Yeah,
it was just incredible. I mean, the image of Boris Johnson as I think he's foreign minister. Is that correct?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but yeah.
That guy.
It's basically the UK's Trump. the way of putting it is Boris Johnson is our foreign secretary, or maybe not for much longer, depending on the outcome of the upcoming election. But as the foreign secretary for almost a year, it's like you guys in America having Trump as president.
Well, I actually should qualify. I'm in Canada.
I wasn't sure. I didn't want to say anything, but
that's okay. But we all feel, very connected, right? It matters to us up here what's happening down there and what's happening over where you are as well. I guess we'll all have to work hard at what we do and stay aware and engaged in what's happening.
Definitely.
If I just, like people who pay attention to such things, I've thought before about what it must be like to be in Scotland back in, was it in 2014 that the independence vote happened?
Yeah, 2014.
Yeah, and
14th of September, if you want to be exact.
And I've got quite a few Scottish friends myself, and just the idea of having that choice presented to you is just so stark. Maybe coming down from 30,000 feet on the subject of things changing really quickly. So obviously in your profession, things are changing by their very nature all the time. And yet at the same time, you've written a very useful book. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Do you intend to be updating the book regularly?
Yeah, the aim. I want to get it printed. I got 5 copies printed just to see what it's like, because it's nice to have a physical copy of the book. But I want to get it printed for people who like to have physical printed copies. But from an ebook perspective, the aim is to update it as times change. But as we all know, well, maybe not everyone knows, but with security in particular, the landscape is changing, but daily, possibly even hourly. There are new threats, there are new changes in tooling, there are new changes in vulnerabilities, websites, technology. It's changing all the time. So with that rapid change comes the security and the kind of education side of things. It needs to keep up. My aim is to keep the book updated to an extent, but the core topics, I believe, won't change. There will still be web application testing, there will still be infrastructure testing, there will still be reporting, there will still be social aspects of things, there will still be programming, and there'll still be like basic networking, but the actual kind of layers on top of that will change, and there will be specific details in the book that may become outdated, and I hope to update them as and when they do change. That's the plan anyway. Whether or not that happens in practice will depend on other factors at work.
Yeah, it's I thought the approach that you took to the book seemed very solid. It starts out with, imagine if you're starting from scratch and it's like, what's the internet? That's going to remain useful knowledge that you don't need to update for some time, presumably. And there are these foundational things that one can learn. Can I ask, just from a sort of, in being in the industry, what service did you use for making the print copies?
For making the print copies? There's a company in the UK, well, there's lots of companies in the UK that will print limited runs. I used like a printing company to get 5 A5 copies printed, but it proved pretty expensive, so I've been looking at other potential suppliers, because there's a conference upcoming in the UK called B-Sides London, which is happening in like 2 weeks' time. And one of my friends suggested, go and launch your book there. Like we'll make a big fuss about it, and if you've got physical copies, great, go for it. And initially I was like, oh yeah, that'd be a good idea. And then I was like, shit, I don't have any printed copies. I need to get that done. I still need to get that done, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to take like 50 copies down with me, and even if I sell one, I'll be happy. Because the initial aim for me when I was creating my book was if I sell 5 copies, I'll be happy. Now I've sold about 160 copies, which is a lot more than I was expecting, and yeah, it's good.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. By the way, getting that many readers is a real accomplishment. One thing that I should say that if you do want to print multiple copies of your book that you want to take to conferences and stuff like that, there's more efficient ways of doing that than with Lulu and CreateSpace. But at the same time, with services like Lulu and CreateSpace, you can make your ebook on Leanpub, and then you can make your book available for print on demand through services like that.
Are they worldwide? Are they tied to the US and Canada?
No, they're worldwide. CreateSpace is through Amazon. The only issue is that for your for the general use case of I want to have print books available for people to buy, things like Lulu and CreateSpace are really good. But if you actually have a specific plan, like I want to print 100 copies and I want to have those that I take with me to conferences, I think there are cheaper options than putting it up on Lulu or CreateSpace and then ordering 100 copies yourself.
Right. Okay.
So they're sort of very specific, but we do have a print-ready PDF export option that you can use.
Yeah, I saw that. It's a great.
Yeah.
I mean, the export functionality in Leanpub is fantastic. I mean, the ability. I mean, there's lots of great features on the platform, but the main things I enjoyed when I was writing the book was the ability to output a preview PDF as I was writing the book, going, right, this works, this doesn't work. But what that led me to do was to chuck the preview PDF at my proofreaders to go, like, does this sound technically correct or not? And it wasn't the full thing. It was like maybe outputting a couple of chapters at a time as I was writing. But then now that it's published, the export features, I can export it unbranded, I can export it print ready, I can export the published version. I think I can export it to various other formats as well. It's complete mind blank there. It's really useful, and the kind of post-publication dashboard is great.
Thanks for the kind words. It's rather, I mean, there's always room for improvement, but Leanpub is rather battle hardened. We work closely with and listen attentively to authors, especially when they're doing something that maybe we haven't encountered before, and so it's through their own experience, and that's, I mean, one of the reasons that we can't entirely take credit for the way things sometimes work very well, because our authors themselves have given us great feedback for how things go for them and what they need. On that topic, I guess my last question for you is, if there were any feature we could build for you, do you have any thoughts as to what you might ask for?
Possibly. I mean, obviously you've got partners with printing, but I think having the option to sell printed versions of your book through the Leanpub platform, I think that would be really good, because what it would mean is that you'd actually have an end-to-end solution that if an author publishes a book, they can go, well, you can buy the e-book and you can pay $5 for it, or you can pay an extra $15 and get the printed version, and that will get sent to your address.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a really good suggestion. It's an avenue we've thought about, or it's a possibility we've thought about before. Getting from A to Z can be pretty difficult. Especially if, I mean, we don't have any sort of print partners. I mean, we do provide output that you can use for Lulu and CreateSpace and things like that. But
have you thought about partnering with them? Have you floated the idea with them?
It's something we've thought about. It's the world of digital marketplaces, and the worlds of digital marketplaces and the digital marketplace and the physical marketplace are very different. And that's something that requires some kind of cultural adjustment, perhaps on both sides, if we were to do something like that. So it's thanks for the suggestion. I mean, it's definitely something that getting encouraged to do can maybe help push us in a direction. But we're not the biggest company in the world, and there's always other things to do. But yeah, thanks for that suggestion. It's definitely something that people have asked for before.
There is one other suggestion that springs to mind. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It might already be there. I mean, there is the testimonials aspect of your book, of when an author publishes a book, they can enter testimonials from readers. But as far as I can see, there's not a place that a reader can click on and go, I want to review this book.
So this is actually something, funnily enough, I was just answering a question about earlier today. But we don't have a reviews option on Leanpub. It's something that people do naturally enough ask for or suggest or even expect sometimes. With us, it's a little... Leanpub, because of our emphasis on in-progress publishing, and because we make it so easy to update books, the reviews are themselves pose a potential problem. Because what if someone puts up a review saying, chapter 2 sucks, and then the author sees that and then improves chapter 2, what do you do with that review?
Well, what you could do, I mean, it's a suggestion. I've noticed it more and more recently on the Google Play Store. So, like on Android, if an application is reviewed, that say, I don't know, take Twitter for example. Say the Twitter application is reviewed, and then Twitter see that if there's a flaw there, so they go and release a new version. What the review will say is this review was left for this version. This was X months before the latest version was patched. Now, doing that programmatically wouldn't be too difficult, because all you would need to do would be to look at the revision history on a book and say, well, this is a review of this version. The current version is X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, that's a good suggestion. I mean, I think actually what the app, as I understand it, what the App Store does is just deletes when you publish a new version of your app, they just delete all the old reviews, which is a kind of like much less sophisticated than what you're describing. But one of the interesting issues is that just before we go is that regardless of how well things are spelled out, you know, the average person coming to it isn't necessarily going to bring, you know, their full game to understanding what they're encountering. And if they just see something negative, well, they see something negative. You know, that's part of the challenge around reviews. But I mean, it's not something that I don't want to speak on behalf of my colleagues, but I don't think it's something we've, you know, decided we're never going to do. But if we ever do it, we're going to, you know, do something well thought through, like, you know, possibly along the lines of what you suggested, where it's, you know, reviews are tied to timing and releases and things like that, just to make it as clear as possible, you know, at what point these comments were made or this review was made in the book's genesis, and perhaps even things that have changed since it was written. Well, anyway, Andy, thanks very much for those suggestions, and for using Leanpub, and for taking the time to do this interview, which I very much enjoyed. I like talking to, and when you encounter someone else who does, it's always great fun.
Yeah, it was really interesting. As I said, my email was a bit delayed because I had some email issues, but I sorted them out fairly quickly, so all good with that.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much for being on the Leanpub podcast and for being a Leanpub author.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for featuring my book. It's doing well.
Oh, no problem.